You're listening to That Music Podcast with Bryson Tarvin, the curriculum designer and educational consultant behind That Music Teacher and the Elementary Music Summit. Each week, Bryson and his guests will dive into the reality of being an elementary music teacher and how music can truly be transformative in the lives of the students you serve. Show notes and resources mentioned in this episode can be found at thatmusicteacher.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to That Music Podcast. I'm really excited for today's episode because I think it is really important. With that being said, I am a little bit uncomfortable sharing this topic. And I think that that's important for me to share because there are so many of us that are in the classroom that might feel a little bit uncomfortable talking about DEI. And I think that is something that we need to talk about more. So I want to start off this episode by acknowledging the fact that I'm a cis white man, and that is important for me to share. So everything that I'm coming from and that I'm sharing in this episode is coming from my experience and my understanding, which is likely flawed in some places. So if you are looking to dive a little bit deeper in this topic, I highly recommend you check out episode 168, where I talked with Ashley Cuthbertson about this topic, because I think she's going to be able to put it into a lot better understanding than I am. But I also think it's important for me to share this topic as well. So where did this topic come from? A while back, after we do all of our summits, we always send out surveys asking for, what are some things that we really enjoyed? What are some things that we, what you want more of, you want less of, what can we change for future events to make this more impactful for you? And this is all anonymous. So we get a lot of feedback, and we've used a lot of that feedback to change the events. But we have received some feedback in the past about the fact that we focus too much on DEI, and that DEI is a controversial thing for some people. And I understand where that's coming from, and I understand that there's a lot of rhetoric about what DEI is that isn't entirely truthful or entirely the way that it is. And I think that the majority of us are a little uncomfortable talking about this because we don't want to make mistakes. We don't want to say things that are wrong. And then there are some people that they just have misconceptions about what DEI is. So I want to talk about that. And I think it's really important, even at the elementary level in the music classroom, for us as teachers to be talking about this. When we are talking about DEI, we are not pushing an agenda. We are just ensuring that every single student that walks into our classroom feels seen, valued, and is capable of success. I think that as teachers, we can get behind that, right? Every single person that walks through our classroom deserves to see themselves in our classroom. And it's also important for us to share other experiences in our classroom, because the world we live in is not so stuck in one way that everyone's experience is going to be different. Everyone's experience is going to be incredibly different. Not everyone's experience is going to be the same, because everyone's experience is different. So I want you to think about it like this. If you had a student that was left-handed and you only gave them right-handed scissors, they wouldn't see themselves. They would feel a little hindered, and they might not necessarily feel fully included in the classroom. On the other side of things, you might have students that are right-handed that never know that left-handed scissors are even a thing. And I think that when we reframe it in that way and simplify it in that way, it's really about making sure that students have what they need to see themselves in their classroom and feel like they are a part of that classroom, but also sharing it in a way that they're not going to be on the margins, right? When we talk about marginalized communities, it's really important for us to, one, have those conversations, but two, to ensure that we are doing our best to do more than just having that conversation. A lot of what we do in the music classroom already has some of the seeds of DEI, when we're differentiation for different learning styles, when we're talking about social emotional needs for our students, and choosing, repertoire that has that has different genres and different areas of the world. There's so much more to DEI than that, but there are already seeds in our teaching a lot of the time. It really isn't radical. I want to I want to clarify that DEI is not a radical thing. It's teaching with empathy and an intention. Something I hear a lot when we have conversations about DEI is that it doesn't belong in the elementary classroom. The students are too young. They are not ready for this. And I think that that can be true based on how we frame it, but it's also incredibly untrue, because the way that we're doing this, we are not coming into an elementary lesson and having this huge discussion on race and gender and inclusion and all these different things. What we're doing is we're planting seeds of empathy, right? We're giving them the tools and the understanding that there are different things out there to explore. There are communities that are different than their own, but there are also ways and opportunities to explore your own community. And this is one of those things where when we talk about some of these topics that for better or for worse, I would argue for worse, have turned into these conversations that really get turned to us versus them, and woke versus unwoke. It really comes down to the fact that representation matters. I'm not saying that we should only focus on one aspect or only focus on another, but the reality is, if a student does not see themselves in the classroom that they are in, they will not succeed as much as they will if they didn't. And students that aren't able to see that there are differences in the world are going to be very surprised when they get dropped into the real world and there are differences. And I think that's one of those things that, as teachers in general, regardless of what we teach, it's important for us to start these conversations. It's important for us to do it at an age appropriate level. I think that is true. But I also think it's really important for us to not use young kids as an opportunity to say, well, we'll do it later. We'll worry about that in high school. Because the reality is, students are forming who they are as people now. I'm sure there are some of us you may or may not be listening that are saying, I'm a music teacher, I teach music. There's no place for this in my classroom. The reality is, we do teach music, but there is so much in music that we can do beyond teaching just musical concepts, right? We teach team building. We teach how to work with others. We teach creativity, how to think about things outside the box. There are so many other things that happen in the music classroom other than TAs and TTs. So how is this any different, right? This is all about understanding that there's something more than maybe you're already doing. Or maybe there's another step you can take. Or maybe you need to take that first step and really kind of examine what's going on in your classroom. Because it's not just who are in your classroom, it's about how we're preparing those students in our classroom to understand the world that is around them. So while I might get some pushback on this episode, I think it's an important conversation to have, or at least to start, because it's not a one and done thing. And again, as a cis white male, I am coming at this from a place of privilege. And I think that's important for me to acknowledge that. But I also feel like it's important for me to start this conversation and share this conversation, and not restart the conversation, but continue the conversation that so many other people have started before me. And I think it's important for every single person in the teaching profession, regardless of what they teach, regardless of how long they've been teaching or where they teach, or the students that are in their classroom, take a critical look at what is actually happening in their classroom and asking yourself, are my students represented, and is the world represented? And if you can't answer yes to both of those questions, then you need to take another step and figure out what we can do next. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of That Music Podcast. If you have not subscribed, please do us a favor and subscribe wherever you're listening to this. If you haven't left us a review, we would love for you to leave a review on iTunes, or leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube. We are super excited for the episodes that you're going to see for the rest of the year. And as always, in case nobody has told you lately, thank you so much for making a difference in the lives of the students that you teach.